We own.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's technical session. My name is Al Kassam, and I'm the technical coordinator at CSUR. On behalf of Dan Allen, our president and CEO, and Stephanie Smith, our events and operations coordinator, I want to welcome you all to today's webinar. To begin with, I want to thank our corporate sponsor, Calfrac Well Services, for their continued support of this technical webinar series. I also want to thank Stephanie Smith for taking care of all the background technical arrangements for us and for communicating with all of you ahead of this session. So today we have a series of presentations that are part of Geoscience BC's 2020 report of activities. The selected presentations you'll hear today fall into one of the three categories listed below. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of our guest speakers today for their time and effort in putting their presentations together. We'll get started with the technical program here shortly. However, before I do that, I want to make everyone aware of what's coming up over the next few weeks and months. All of these sessions have been confirmed and finalized. Our next webinar will take place on Tuesday, March 9th. Daniel Shaw will deliver a talk on sequence stratigraphic analysis of the Duvernay Formation Shale, Kaybob area, Alberta. This was part of Daniel's work for his master's degree program at U of A. For more information and registration, please visit our website. We also have confirmed and we've opened the registration portal for Well Data Labs. Rare Perez will be on hand to talk about applications of machine learning in real time. This webinar will take place on Tuesday, May 4th. We also have a series of other sessions that we, like I said, we've confirmed and finalized, and we'll be releasing additional information and opening the registration portal for each of these in due course. We encourage all of you to continue sending in your ideas and suggestions for topics and subjects that you'd like us to investigate. Please also provide us with your feedback regarding our programs, webinars, and events. We look forward to hearing from you. And while this disclaimer is on, I'll quickly go through the logistics for today's webinar. As you hover your mouse near the bottom of your screen, a Zoom menu bar will appear. Please use the chat option to communicate with Stephanie or myself during the session, and use the Q&A option to post questions and comments for the speakers. Our moderator for the day, Dan Allen, will relay these questions to each of the speakers after their respective presentation. I'll now hand it over to Carlos Salas, Executive VP and Chief Scientific Officer for Geoscience BC, to say a few words. Welcome, Carlos.
Thanks, Al. And good morning, everyone. And thanks for joining us at our joint CSUR Geoscience BC webinar today, highlighting our yearly summary of activities report summarizing research which we funded, answering problem statements, and closing knowledge gaps in the focus areas of energy and water. And I should also add that we have a summary of activities, our report for the minerals focus area. I'm Carlos Salas, Chief Scientific Officer at Geoscience BC. And for those who don't know who we are, let me play this short video about ourselves.
Geoscience BC's collaborative minerals, energy, and water earth science research projects bring together industry, government, academia, Indigenous groups, and communities. Geoscience BC is an independent, not-for-profit society powered by more than 50 volunteers. It is part of an agile, made-in-BC coordinated approach to public earth science. Geoscience BC research supports jobs and attracts investment. Every dollar of minerals research results in more than $6 of mineral exploration investment. stimulates innovation that makes BC more competitive. New techniques and methods that can be used in BC and exported. Minimizes emissions and environmental impacts. Open data about induced seismicity, emissions, and water. Encourages development of new cleaner energy sources. Understanding clean geothermal energy potential. Develops new relationships with Indigenous groups. Building partnerships and understanding. Increases knowledge and technical capacity. 124 geoscience scholarships have been funded since 2007. Working together, we can attract investment, inform sound decisions, and catalyze a cleaner, lower carbon future for all British Columbians.
Thank you very much, Candice. Now, this is the second time we've presented papers from our summary of activity volume here at CSUR. And we'd like to thank everyone at CSUR for enabling this fully booked webinar. Now, today we'll be highlighting our summary of activities report comprising of technical papers from various projects that we funded. This year, there are 16 technical papers, all arranged under the strategic objectives, namely facilitating responsible natural resource development, advancing science and innovative geoscience technologies, enabling clean energy, and understanding water. Now, today we'll be hearing from 6 of the authors, representing a cross-section of strategic objectives which we are funding. Now, a couple of points which I should first add before we get started. During the short break, there will be a poll on your screen about how you hear about Geoscience BC research, and which will take you about 10 seconds to complete. So please do take part in this, and it will ensure that our independent, peer-reviewed public research gets disseminated through. Hang on, I think I was muted all along. Sorry about that, folks. I thought I pushed the button. Anyhow, let me just recap what I was.
No, it was good. It just was muted. Yeah, it was just muted for like a few seconds.
A few seconds. Okay, very good. So just let me say now that please do that poll that we have up during the break. And secondly, I'd like to point out that today's we're excited to be launching Dr. Susan Lapp's pilot collaborative water monitoring program. So do watch out for that. And so with that, let's get the show started, and I'll pass it over to Dan.
Thank you, Carlos. Greetings, everyone from beautiful Hawaii. Don't ask me how I got here, but it's a virtual trip. Sounds like I'm back in university. A little bad joke there. So we've got a lot of speakers on tap today. The first group of 3 will be talking on somewhat different topics. So the strategy will be to listen to the presenter, and then fire your questions off in the chat icon, and we can keep track of what those questions are. The speaker will be able to look at those as he finishes his talk, and I will prompt him, and we'll have a brief Q&A after each talk, and then we'll move on to the next one, because the subject matter is quite different as we go through. So that's the process. Feel free to fire off your questions. As I said, it's going to be a full morning, so we'll hopefully get to all the questions. Every presenter will have his email address on his presentation, so if we run out of time, you can contact him directly. So starting right off is Brad Hayes, and Brad's never short of things to say, so let's hear what he's got to talk about.
Thank you for that gracious introduction, Dan. Let me get right to the presentation here. Stephanie, can I share my screen?
Yes.
Okay. No. It's circling about it at the moment. So. While I'm waiting for my screen to share, I'm going to talk about wastewater disposal in the maturing Montney Fairway of northeastern British Columbia. This is a joint project funded, of course, by Geoscience BC and the team at Petrel Robertson Consulting. including several of our colleagues at supporting consulting firms, are working through the presentation, working through the work. We have completed a final draft report on this within the next 5 or 6 weeks. And today is a quick progress report, I hope, when I can share my screen, of what we've been doing. So, Stephanie, I'm sorry, I'm just getting a circle.
Is it loading?
It doesn't say what it's done is it's faded me back a little bit, and my little blue around. So it's just not engaging.
Try to close and open again.
Okay. The presentation itself, you mean? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
All right. That's a good plan. Let me restart it. Okay. And yeah.
Here we go.
There, we got it now?
Yeah,
Good.
yeah.
Sorry about, okay. Thank you. Okay, so let's, it looks like it's got me. Sorry. Gee, I think I'd never done this before. Okay.
You want me to send the presentation
If you've
to the
got,
screen?
okay, let me close it again. Okay. Sorry, do you have the presentation? I don't think you do.
No, I don't. If you want to send
okay,
me, you can try to.
Let me try one more time here, sorry. Oh, heavens. All right.
Yeah, I can see it.
Got it now? Thank you. Okay, away we go. So there's a group of people. Background on the study: the Hydraulic Fracturing Review Panel in 2019 stated as one of the major conclusions that safe disposal of fluids arising from hydraulic fracturing operations requires a lot more work. Geoscience BC defined this particular project on understanding water disposal potential in the Montney Fairway of northeastern BC and provided funding to our team to undertake this study specifically to address the concerns raised by the panel. As background, the OGC, as we know, authorizes subsurface disposal and regulates reservoir and operating conditions, and they've got a pretty good handle on the disposal zone situation themselves already. We know that disposal of frac flowback and produced fluids has increased substantially in the Montney Fairway as development progresses. Disposal volumes have been minimized with recycling and water sharing plans, but some disposal wells have been filled to capacity, and we do have concerns about overall disposal capacity under OGC guidelines during Montney development as we ramp up for LNG production in the near future. So the work plan that our team undertook was primarily to consult with operators and the OGC to get up to speed on existing practices and issues. And we had a great deal of cooperation from a variety of operators in helping us out with understanding things. We've been working over the last several months on interpreting the performance of existing disposal wells, characterizing and mapping the primary regional disposal aquifers. We're bringing in the additional elements of mapping structural elements throughout the area to identify discontinuities and potential effects on disposal reservoirs. And I've got a couple of slides to highlight that today. Characterizing geomechanical stress is also applied to understanding containment risks and compartmentalization associated with disposal aquifers. So our area of study is in northeastern BC. It's outlined in the blue here. We've got foothills outcrops off to the west. We've got the Montney Clay Fairway. You can see developed through here with all the horizontal drilling in the Heritage Montney Pool and then in the Northern Montney Pool. The existing disposal wells, there's 176 of them that we've counted up. The bluish ones are Cretaceous aquifers, green Triassic, predominantly the Beldonal and the Halfway, and red's Mississippian, primarily the DeBolt. And you can see that the younger disposal aquifers dominate in the southern part of the Montney study area, primarily because that's where Cretaceous sandstone reservoirs are well developed and have high capacities for aquifer for fluid containment. Further to the north, where most of our Cretaceous shales out, we're left to rely on the Triassic and the DeBolt. Stratigraphic column in the area, we can see the older rocks on the right, the younger ones on the left here, that we're studying potential aquifers from the DeBolt up through the Halfway, Beldonal, Niconassin, Catamount, Blue Sky, and Peace River. There is minor disposal in other places such as the Beloy and the Charlie Lake, and I think even one well in the Doig. However, these are very limited in British Columbia, and we studied them only briefly. Looking through the entire Montney Fairway in the project area outlined, we can see that the most common disposal zone is the Catamount, with 33 disposal wells utilized to date. The other big players are the Peace River, the Paddy Cadot, the Beldonal, the Blue Sky, and the Halfway. Others with more minor roles, and as I mentioned, I forgot to mention a couple of wells in the Spirit River on the Alberta side, one Gething disposal well, and one Slate Point disposal well, too. Just looking at the general capacity of these wells overall, and of course we're mapping these out on individual formation basis too, but it's interesting there are 89 of our 176 wells that have disposed less than 100,000 cubic meters of fluid. The red ones here are abandoned or suspended wells, and mostly those are old legacy wells. The green ones are the currently active wells. And some of these currently active wells are quite new, so perhaps they'll have greater capacity as their lifetime extends. Out at the other end of the scale, there are actually 9 wells, 5 of them still active, that have disposed more than 1 million cubic meters of fluids. Now, this isn't necessarily all Montney fluids. Some of these disposal wells are in the area and have taken water from pre-existing gas production and so on, but most of the current activity is disposing water from the Montney. I've mentioned before in earlier presentations that we've undertaken and now completed a bunch of aquifer characterization geologically with respect to our major reservoirs. So here's a isopac map of the Catamount Formation showing where the various disposal wells lie within our map area. And not surprisingly, most of the Catamount disposal wells are out to the east where reservoir quality is better and in relatively thick areas. We can see there's quite a distribution of disposal capacities across the Catamount. It's notable that there are at least there are 8-9 wells that are still active that have pretty high disposal volume counts to them in the Catamount, and still a number of them are quite active. The one update element I wanted to add today is work by Dr. Mark Cooper in characterizing the structural regime of the Montney study area. And what Mark's done here is taken quite a long history of structural expertise in northeastern BC and tried to put all the elements together on one map here. So we see the foothills structural regime in red on the left, of course, the Fort St. John Graben complex with all the normal faults here out on the east side, but extending comfortably into the Montney area. The Hay River Shear Zone and its associated faults that come down into the northeastern part of the area. And in fact, we can extend them southwestward along the yellow chevrons here, where we see significant deflections within the disturb zone, disturb belt, and the end of the Fort St. John Graben. So it's very interesting to look across these different areas to see what the local stresses associated with the structural regime do to affect the behavior of our aquifers. And that's what we're going to be drawing together as we finish up this project. Now, Mark has built a number of regional cross sections using a great deal of well control, in addition to previous knowledge about faults and other structural discontinuities associated with seismic and that he's encountered throughout his long career in this area. These structural sections look like this. Now, obviously, they're very long. He usually displays them at true scale, so there's not any vertical exaggeration. So there's not a heck of a lot one can see just looking at them from this distance. But I wanted to impress upon you that all these colored labels here are well control that have been integrated into the drawing of the structural cross section. So he's integrated all of those structural features to interpret the faults, the structural compartments, and the stress regimes. Just zeroing in on one of the cross sections in the western part of the study area, we can see that a number of different faults and fault types have been interpreted. Many of them, some of them coming to surface obviously in the disturb belt, but many of them in the subsurface that we can interpret as having significant effects on the behavior of our disposal zones, particularly some of our deeper disposal zones like the Bold and the Halfway. And we're going to again relate that to individual disposal well performance and geomechanics, and also the fluid systems, which Dr. Ben Rostron's working on to help more complete understanding of our disposal aquifers. So to sum up my brief report here then, we see significant disposal capacity currently under development in the Peace River, Blue Sky, and Catamount as Montney development takes place particularly in the heritage pool part of the Montney Fairway. Baldonnel, Halfway, and DeBolt disposal zones were very important in the past. They're less active today, although we expect the deeper zones to pick up as the northern Montney Fairway is further developed with the LNG coming on board. Niconas and Buick Creek offers a large capacity, huge and porous sandstones in many places. It's only lightly utilized and oftentimes commingled disposal with the Catamount. We know that major structural elements play a role, and we're going to try to quantify that role as we move forward. And finally, the detailed reservoir engineering and geomechanical analyses will help us out in here. And again, these studies are in progress. We expect when we get to our final report in a short time that we'll be bringing all of these elements together and being able to say quite a lot more about the performance of individual aquifers. So thank you very much, and sorry for the delay in getting started.
Okay, thank you, Brad. I think I was incorrect in saying use your chat icon. I've been informed that if you have any questions, use the Q&A. So if anyone has any, that's where they should go to. I didn't see any. I just lost it all. But I had two questions, Brad, before we move on to the next speaker. One is obviously faulting is really important into controlling where injection is going to go. Were the faults that Mark determined were they based on seismic data or well control or a combination of both?
Combination of both. We didn't have the budget in this project to acquire new seismic data or to look at old stuff. Mark has a history through many of his projects and working in the area of having seen some number of seismic lines, so he used those. There were some faults interpreted from older Petrel-Robertson studies where we shared seismic data with study participants. So some of the faulting related to the antler orogeny in the Northwest are from that. But then Mark was also able to interpret some number of faults, particularly further east out into the main part of the fairway with the detailed well control and just the relationships he saw between those wells. So he's basically throwing together everything he can find, and I think this will be the most comprehensive reconstruction of fault trends that we'll have seen to date.
Okay. There was one question that came in from John Ostrom on the potential that may or may not exist in the Granite Wash. Any comments?
Interesting. It's an interesting idea. There are very few penetrations. I think conceptually there may well be some potential. It's not something we looked at simply because we don't have enough information. But if John wants to feed me anything, I'll be happy to look at it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you. And I'm sorry I've got to sign off now, but good luck with the rest of the talks.
Okay, thank you. So our next speaker coming up is Gareth, coming by video. So I guess Candace is going to set up the video for Gareth Chalmers' presentation.
Thank you for joining me in this presentation on hydrogen sulfide gas generation in the Triassic Montney unconventional play. I also like to thank Geoscience BC and CSUR for this opportunity. This is a collaborative work between the University of the Sunshine Coast in Australia and the University of British Columbia. As you're probably well aware, H2s gas is highly toxic. It's both detrimental to humans and the environment. With very small concentrations, like over 500 parts per million, can be fatal. It's also highly corrosive, and companies will need to understand the risk of souring and procure sour service pipe for their areas of high risk. The generation of hydrogen sulfide gas is a thermochemical sulfate reduction process, or an abiotic reaction in this particular case. We see that bacterial sulfate reduction can occur as well. However, here we're at greater depths, over 90 degrees Celsius, and bacteria does not survive. So the sources of sulfur include evaporites like anhydrite, gypsum, barite, as well as oxidation of pyrite, sulfur from organic matter, as well as sulfate from fresh water during fracking operations. The hydrocarbons are oxidized as sulfate is reduced to form H2s, as shown by this equation down the bottom here. So as more Montney formation wells are being drilled, we're starting to see more and more sour gas being discovered in areas that were assumed to be sweet. And this distribution can be inexplicable. You can see in these multi-well pads on this diagram on the side here that we see that there's sour and sweet wells that can be on neighboring laterals. So the reasons why this is happening is not clear. So we're using sulfur isotopic analysis to try to identify the sources of the sulfur. Is it from the neighboring Triassic strata, or is it coming from deeper below in the Devonian? So this model will also help producers to understand the risks in their area of souring and during their well planning procedures. So looking at the sources of sulfate for the Montney, both from the literature as well from our study, we've identified least probable sources and the most probable source. Least probable sources include the organic sulfur in kerogen. The kerogen in the Montney formation is sulfur poor. Oxidation of pyrite would need a lot of oxygen being brought into the system, maybe through frack water. This would be self-limiting, so we'd see a spike of H2s gas generation, then a decline to zero. Sulfate within freshwater during frack water operations we'd be self-limiting as well. We'd see a spike of H2s generation, then a decline to zero as well. These wells that we're looking at do not decline. They keep a constant concentration of H2s production. So the most probable source of sulfur is probably sulfate. Evaporites like anhydrite and gypsum are seen throughout the Montney. This is an example here in a fracture. I'm also seeing it within some of my core, but it's actually within disseminated throughout. There's also a high percentage of anhydrite in the Charlie Lake Formation. That's a Triassic formation that sits above the Montney, as well as in Devonian rocks below, like the Muskeg Formation. And as I mentioned, anhydrite has formed in the Montney, and we're going to confirm how that is, if it's syn-depositional or post-depositional. This diagram is showing the stratigraphic sections through the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin where my study is being held. And you can see here the Montney. It's actually sandwiched between sour pools above, like the Charlie Lake and halfway, and then also below through some Mississippian and all the way through down into the Devonian limestones here. This study is looking at the upper, the middle, and the lower Montney sections. In this case, we've broken it down on the map here. You can see the distributions of where it's sour in the stratigraphy throughout British Columbia and Alberta. This follows this 120-degree line here of longitude. Here's where we are on the western side of Canada. You can see there's quite a lot of sour gas in the Montney occurring in the Alberta side. This has been developed for quite some time before it was deemed an unconventional system. Over here is the newer parts of the development. These blue areas are Montney producers. So where there isn't any squares, circles, or triangles are areas that are sweet. So we can see there are scatterings of sour, and then we can actually get areas where we really start to concentrate in areas. Here we have the distribution of the anhydrite stratigraphically in both a table form and in a graphical form. We can see in this example the Charlie Lake has high anhydrite, and you can see there is small traces in the Montney. Again, you can see in this example up to 1% is in the Montney formation. This is confirmed through chemical separation means. I have pulled out anhydrite from these particular samples here, so it does actually exist. This is also seen from Sharma and 69 in this well up in the top here, that anhydrite is actually being found in the halfway, which sits below the Charlie Lake, and this is due to circulation of groundwater as a post-depositional feature. So this could be what be occurring in the Montney. So SEM textual analysis will confirm whether the anhydrite is syn-depositional or post-depositional. So I have an example here of the oxygen isotopes plotted on the x-axis and the sulfur isotopes on the y-axis. In this green box, these data points are showing the Triassic sulfate composition, and you can see that the sulfur isotope is much lighter than the Devonian sulfate sources that have been sampled in the past. You compare that to the sulfur coming from the H2s gas from the Montney wells, you can see the sulfur has a similar signature to the Triassic sulfate. While you look at the Devonian H2s sulfur, and it has a heavier isotopic signature similar to the Devonian sulfate sources. So this data is starting to show that there's a clear separation between Devonian sources and Triassic sources. Some of the Montney wells are showing a slightly heavier signature, and this could be due to a mixing between Devonian and Triassic sulfate sources. Here's a preliminary model for the H2s formation. I have the mineral sulfur being converted to H2s gas in situ. This is probably not the way it's actually occurring, or you'd expect it to be more continuous in terms of being sour across the area. This is probably what I'm thinking is happening. We have the Charlie Lake sulfur as an anhydrite coming down through a fault system early on, and then as hydrocarbons form, it develops H2s with the anhydrite in the area. This shows the signature of the Charlie Lake and the Montney are similar. In some cases, I mentioned, we have some higher isotopic signatures, and this is probably more of what we're seeing. The H2S gas or the sulfur is coming up through a fault system in the Devonian and mixing with the Triassic source, like the Triassic, and this is giving that heavier signature. So this project is showing that the sulfate minerals that are responsible for H2S gas in the Montney are being sourced in the Triassic, or a mixture of Devonian and Triassic sulfate source, and not purely from a Devonian source as some operators believe. We recommend mapping H2S pools above and below the Montney formation, as well as use seismic data to identify any structure across the area. I think this can also be applied to other basins around the world where we're starting to see sourings beginning to occur in places that were assumed to be sweet. Additional work will include sulfur isotopic analysis of other minerals like pyrite as well as organic matter, and then do some textural analysis to determine syn-depositional, post-depositional features for the anhydrite in the Montney. Thank you.
Thank you, Gareth, via video from Australia. We're happy to have Gareth's thesis advisor on our connection this morning. It's Dr. Mark Buston. Mark, if you're around, can you let us know?
Yeah, good morning, everybody.
Good. So anyone feel free to question Mark. He usually has the answer for most things, but I always love to try to trip him up. So this would be a good opportunity. To start off, I've got one brief one, and that was, do you see that the concentrations of H2S in the gas stream, do they change over time? And will a well go from basically sweet gas to sour gas over the production history of the well?
Yeah, it's almost inexplicable. Some wells go from sour to sweet, some go from sweet to sour, and some remain constant. Most of the real high concentrations, which most of the data that Gareth is showing us from, is fairly consistent. But certainly we do see spikes in H2S, which almost unequivocally is due to us intervening by drilling and fracking the well and then oxidizing probably the pyrite and then having a carbohydrate there that then, of course, bacterial sulfate reduction occurs. So that's clearly happening at some wells, but mostly the high H2S is pretty much fairly constant.
Okay, so basically, if I understand you correctly, a well can start sweet and then move, but the highest concentration wells, do they always start with some H2S?
Almost always, but
Okay.
no, it varies so much geographically. It seems like one answer doesn't fit all areas. And our industry partners, we obviously have more detailed work done in their particular areas, and it's amazing how different they are.
There's a question here from Andy on how do most Montney operators deal with excessive H2S?
Well, if it's completely sour, then they have to deal with it with a sour midstream handling facility. But if it's just very low concentrations, you can do a drip at the well site to handle very low concentrations. So it varies dramatically in what the concentration is. Like a few ppm you can handle at the well site, but it gets much higher than that. You really have to have the midstream designed for it. And of course, that's the problem. If you don't know what you're going to get, you don't know how to design your midstream facilities.
Yeah, I think that's part of Andy's question. That the second half of his question was, how do they handle acid gas disposal, especially with the water disposal issues that were brought up by Brad?
Yeah, well, there are acid gas disposal wells in British Columbia. So that's how they're handling it.
So I guess that may be a future point of investigation for Brad is how do we, identify more places for acid gas disposal? Because I think they're limited, aren't they?
Yeah, you know what? I can't answer that question. I'm not sure. I know that we've monitored at least one acid gas disposal well, so I know there's multiple of them around.
Well, excellent. Thanks so much for that.
Yeah,
And,
just I should tell you that Gareth, I asked him last night if he had any answers for the questions I might get, and he offered 3 answers. 1 was not in the scope of the study. 2 was no, you were wrong. And 3, if you'd like to know more, we're looking for more money for our research.
yeah.
There you go.
And the check's in the mail, right?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Take care.
Bye now.
Our last speaker in this session is, and I think he's on standby here, is, here's Pablo. He's ready, I think, right?
Yeah, hi, Dan. Let me just figure out this screen sharing. Yeah, can you see my slides?
All good.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, so I'm gonna talk about the regional mapping and resource assessment of the Dike Formation, Triassic of Western Canada, which is part of my PhD thesis, mostly not yet published. And I'm also supervised by Professor Busting. I'm trusting he'll stick around to answer any questions that I may get. And so I'd like to thank Geoscience BC and CSUR for this opportunity to present, and also acknowledge the financial support from Geoscience BC, NSERC, Geologic Systems, Chevron, Ovintiv, Devon, Husky, AGAT, CNRL, and software donation by Geologic and Paradigm Emerson. So as a brief overview of the presentation, I'm going to show the regional mapping of the structure and isochord mapping of the Doig into Upper Doig, the Doig phosphate zone, and then mapping of the geochemical and source rock properties, DOC, hydrogen index, and thermal maturity. Then a brief summary of the mineralogical and petrophysical characterization of the Doig, a distribution of the gas composition based on gas analysis, a well log derived petrophysical model, and subsequent mapping of the petrophysical properties, and probabilistic and deterministic resource estimation of the gas and liquids in place of the Doig. So the Doig is a Middle Triassic unit, and let me get my laser pointer. And it corresponds to the second transgressive regressive cycle in the Triassic, and is mostly deposited in lower to upper short phase mudstones and siltstones and coquinous, and it grades upwards into the continental or short phase and continental deposits of the Halfway and the Charlotte Lake Formation. So this is a summary of the data that was involved in the study. We conducted more than 300 core and cuttings, rocket vol analysis. Over 1,500 public rocket vol data were also compiled and carefully QC'd. 130 XRD and petrophysical core analysis, including porosity, permeability, methane absorption, and petrography and thin sections. And the petrophysical model was done with 580 well log suites. And the gas mapping was, for the gas mapping, we used 290 well test and production gas analysis. So we subdivided Doig into over its entire extension of the underformed portion of the subcrop into the lower, the basal Doig phosphate zone and the and the upper Doig mudstones and siltstones. So the Doig, and we separated from the halfway, which was not done, at least not in a public fashion before. So the Doig phosphate has 2 depot centers with a maximum thickness of 80 meters here in the south west, close to the provincial border. And it's more, the Doig phosphate zone is more tectonically controlled, whereas the upper Doig has a more unconfined distribution controlled by large-scale basin subsidence, and has a maximum one single depot center with a maximum thickness of 180 meters around the Hudson Hull Flow at the western end of the Fort St. John Graben. Brief summary of the mineralogy, comparison of the mineralogy of the Doig phosphate and the upper Doig. The Doig phosphate is overall richer in clay and poorer in the quartz-rich facies. Although the clay content is still low compared to if you're talking about shales. And it's more of a carbonate-rich to siliceous mudstone. The TOC is much higher in the Doig phosphate than it is in the upper Doig, although the TOC is not associated with the phosphorites, but rather with the mudstones intrabedded with phosphorites. You can see with the dots represent, the size of the dots represents the amount of apatite. So the large dots are the phosphorite beds, and the purple colors are higher TOC. This is the upper Doig mineralogy. It's much more quartz rich, although it has significant calcite content, mostly in the form of cement. The grain size is generally coarser, and there's a lot of grain dissolution, hence porosity with intense pervasive dolomitization. Permeability to porosity cross plot, all derived from matrix permeability to porosity cross plot, all derived from plug samples at in situ, corrected in situ net confining stresses, reveals that the permeability is controlled by a complex interplay between mineralogy, actually mostly pore size diameter, which is represented by the size of the symbols, also mineralogy, which is represented by the color, yellow tones being more quartz rich, carbonate rich being the blue symbols, and the green to brownish being the more mud rich mudstones. Methane absorption varies greatly, mostly according to TOC. It can be as high as 50 cubic meters per ton, or 1.5 cubic centimeters per gram of rock. This is a brief summary of so all the spectrophysical properties were extrapolated to well logs, so as to map the entire stratigraphic and lateral distribution of the properties. So this is a cross section, strike cross section across the Fort St. John Graben, showing the petrophysical model on the left side, the mineral model from the petrophysics on the left-hand side track, and the petrophysical porosity volume model on the next track right over to the right, and match the match with the NMR porosity and the elemental capture spectroscopy logs and core analysis XRD results on this track. So the porosities are calibrated. This is a plot of a histogram of the difference between the total porosity from the petrophysical model and the core log, and this is the same difference cross plot of the effective porosity, meaning any porosity that's not clay associated with clay-bound water, the difference between the effective porosity from the petrophysical model and the NMR log effective porosity above the 3 milliseconds threshold. So those maps are, so the one on the left hand side is the mapping of the thermal maturity, which increases from early oil window on the near the eastern subcrop edge to the increasing maturity to the southwest to overmature in the deepest part of the basin. And the overmature trend continues as a narrow bend towards northeastern BC. Gas wetness in the center has a fairly good, so the blue colors are higher gas wetness of up to 0.3, and has a fairly good correlation with the maturity in the central part of the central and the southwestern part of the basin, but the correlation breaks down to this towards the eastern edge of the subcrop, probably because either due to a mixture of a biogenic gas in the lower temperature part of the subcrop, or a preferential up-dip migration of methane generated in the deeper parts of the basin. The H2s distribution that it correlates very well with the H2s distribution in the Montney, which Gareth just talked about in a video, with the highest H2s distributions being the areas north and northwest of Fort St. John, and just east of the provincial border around Dawson Creek and west of Grand Prairie. So summary of the mineralogy and TOC distribution of the DOIG reveals that the higher TOC areas are to the north, and to the southwest, the content of quartz and generally siliciclastic sediments increases, which ties to what other authors already said about a potential 4-arc basing setting during the Middle Triassic, in which there was a paleo high in the southwest that shed sediments in the southern part of the basin, and a more towards the north there was an open connection to a more open marine setting, giving rise to higher bioproductivity and higher initial TOC. Now finally, the resource assessment, which is a combination of all the properties that I talked about before. So there was a deterministic assessment based on a geocellular model, and also probabilistic assessment giving a range of uncertainties to each property. So the deterministic assessment is, according to the deterministic assessment, there's 270 TCF of gas in the upper Doig and the Doig phosphate zone combined. The average resource density in BC is 16 BCF per section and 5.7 BCF per section in Alberta. The maximum resource density in BC here in the Monayas, in the Hudson Hope Low Monayas region is 62 BCF per section. And also higher gas concentrations are also found in the vicinities of Ground Birch, Fireweed, Butte Creek West, Cache Creek, Monayas, Brassy, Cali, and oil fields. This is a map of the adsorbed to total gas ratio. So in most of the basin, there's a significant component over around and over 50% of adsorbed gas. Only exceptions are in the eastern, the very shallow portion where the Doig is very thin, and the deepermost part, due to combined effects of larger temperature, the flattening of the absorption isotherms with the higher pressures, and also the lower DOC due to thermal maturation, which reduces the absorption capacity. The average liquid to gas ratio is 230 barrels per million cubic feet, and it decreases rapidly to the southwestern, hotter and more mature portion of the basin. This estimate of 250, 270 TCF is a significant upside to the previous estimates by Farage et al. 2002 and the US Energy Information Administration 2015 for the DPZ alone. And it aligns fairly well with the estimates by Walsh et al. 2006, which was for BC only. So if you include Alberta in these estimates, it's within that range by Walsh et al. I hope I didn't go over my time too much. If you have time and like to ask questions, please use the Q&A or feel free to send me an email on this email on the screen.
Obrigado, Pablos.
De nada.
There is one question from Pat McClellan. I notice your petrophysical derived mineral log differs from the XRD data that you displayed for the 9 of 33 well. Can you comment why?
Yeah, here.
Just reading his question.
933.
Pat, if you're on, can you come online?
Okay, I think that's the only part where I compare XRD with the petrophysical model. So one reason is for the model petrophysical model I had to combine dolomite and calcite to have so I have enough logs to estimate enough variables to estimate the mineral volumes. Another reason is is resolution. So this XRD data is point based, so they're actually not continuous as you see. So in the log resolution, the average, the large, many centimeters of rock are average over one interval. And there are also mismatches here and there, but on average, the petrophysical model is right on average, but it's going to be wrong at every other spot.
Okay. I think there was one other question on a couple coming in here before we break. What mapping method did you select for the regional mapping?
So the regional, the mapping was done on a GeoCellular model with the Paradigm Emerson GoCAD modeling software. So everything was done on a grid of 280 layers. And so horizontal spacing for the cells was 1 kilometer, and the vertical spacing was 280 layers for the entire vertical extension of the DOIG. So within that grid, the properties were populated by kriging.
And last question before break. Are you aware of any horizontal legs that are drilled into the DOIG phosphate?
No, I'm not familiar with the development strategies for the DOIG.
Okay. Okay, we'll take a break right here. I think I'm going to pass it over to Al. Al, can you come on in, because I know you had a couple of things and you've got a little bit of some information you want to pass on.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, so we're gonna put up a quick poll while we're taking a break. So it's about a couple minutes after 11, so we'll maybe resume in about by 11:05. So if you want to take a quick break, in the meantime, Stephanie's going to put up a poll for everyone to participate in. So please give us your feedback. This is going straight back to Geoscience BC.
Morning, everyone. While we're during the break, it's Richard here from Geoscience BC. So you'll see during the break, Alan and Stephanie have put up a quick poll. We really want to make sure that everybody who should receive Geoscience BC information is receiving it, to make sure that everybody can make the most of the research that we're doing. So please do just take a couple of seconds just to fill out this form and just let us know how you're finding out about Geoscience BC information, or if you're not finding out about Geoscience BC information. Also, I'll pop up in the chat a little link to some of our social media channels, but also to our email list as well, just to make sure that you can get hold of that information. Thank you.
All right, everyone, I think we're ready to get back. I think we're going to try to have Susan Lapp now get her presentation ready to go. Susan, are you around?
I am here. Everybody should see my screen, hopefully.
Looking good. It's all yours.
Perfect. Oh, I guess I could turn my camera on too. I could have, but now I don't know how to stop it. There we go. Never mind. Okay, we'll start. So my name is Susan Lapp. I am the hydrologist with the BC Oil and Gas Commission. And through Geoscience BC, we are launching an exciting project, and it's called the Pilot Collaborative Water Monitoring Program in Northeast BC. It's quite a mouthful. Just if anybody's never been to the Northeast, is a fantastic picture of just northeast of, or just northwest of Fort St. John. So this project is a collaboration of multiple partners that are listed on the table or listed on the slideshow. So we have Shell, the BC Oil and Gas Commission, Energy and Mines, Matrix Solutions, FUNRO, and Ministry of Environment. So it's really a multi-layer project, very collaborative. So industry and government partners all together. The study area for this project is Northeast BC. And as you can see on this map, it's outlined in red, the primary study area. The area was defined by what's called the ARCEA composite region. And within that study region, you'll note that there are different colored watersheds. The darker the color, so for example, the darker the orange, the higher the level of disturbance. The lighter the color, so as it goes from orange, yellow to green, the less disturbance. And this was done through part of the ARCEA work. The area was also defined by current and future water demands, looking at primarily oil and gas development. As well, we recognize that there's a lack of water monitoring in this data, and that's pretty well known across the board. And as well, there's been a real request for this type of information by First Nations in this region. We're identifying different locations to monitor water based on very specific criteria. So right now, this is kind of our primary study area. And from there, we'll be locating actual water monitoring locations, which I'll describe in a few minutes. I think it's also important to note in this map that there are 6 First Nation communities within this. So we have Doig River First Nation, Blueberry River First Nation, Halfway River First Nation, West Moberly First Nation, Soto First Nation, and McLeod Lake Indian Band. So what is the project? So the project is set to run for a little over 2 years. So we launched this back in early December with a one-day workshop with the 6 First Nation communities that I just mentioned. And this project incorporates 3 different programs. Within the different programs, the intent is to identify 3 or 4 locations where we can co-locate a surface water monitoring station where we can obtain both quality and quantity information. Also install a groundwater monitoring station, so a groundwater well where we as well can obtain water quality and water quantity information, and to as well install a climate monitoring location so we can obtain, how much water is coming into the system and how much water is potentially leaving the system through evaporation or sublimation or other such forms. So trying to get a real sense as to what's going on at that watershed scale, both, surface water and groundwater. So that's kind of part of our project. The other part of the program is to collect just surface water quantity information. So installing a couple hydrometric stations to collect water quantity information. And as well, what really kind of sets this project apart from other projects that are just collecting information, I shouldn't say just collecting information. All water information is valuable, but we're interested in understanding and gathering traditional knowledge, which is a real gap we have right now. So this project consists of 3 different programs within it. This is a pilot study. So really, we're trying to test a number of possible solutions to address a number of challenging aspects of data collection and monitoring here in the Northeast. And if you've been to the Northeast, you recognize that it's a fairly large area, large distances between, you know, Fort St. John to wherever it might be you're going, and not a lot of population. So we run into a lot of challenges with trying to install equipment, gather information. You know, funding is a real problem just because of the cost for travel up here, and as well trying to just get professionals in to help get some of these initiatives going. So, you know, by co-locating these stations, we're looking at employing staff that are trained to collect information from multiple different types of equipment, as well by partnering amongst the various industry and government agencies. You know, we can kind of coordinate efforts rather than having these one-off projects. We can look at trying to pull these projects together and collect information for more than just one purpose. First Nation involvement is really key for this, and it's key for any project. I mean, we can get a project going, but the long-term goal of these projects, and this project in particular, is that eventually the First Nations will be able to manage and collect and run these stations. So that in the long run, you know, is ownership, and it's a huge cost savings in the end. And as well, there's a real data gap up here, which I already mentioned. So we're trying to target some of these high priorities where we have little information, and particularly us as the Oil and Gas Commission, where we're, you know, always asked to make water decisions, which are really challenging with very little information. I'm not going to talk on this a whole lot. This was already mentioned earlier, but a lot of this project stemmed from some of the recommendations within the hydraulic frac review report that came out earlier. And a lot of them were around understanding cumulative effects, understanding groundwater, surface water interactions, and of course, building relationships and knowledge sharing with First Nations. So this project is looking at co-location and First Nation partnership for these type of this water monitoring station. So from each community, we're asking that 1 or 2 community members and or staff will be asked to participate. And through that participation, the community members or staff will learn how to install the different types of water monitoring equipment, whether it's collecting stream flow information, groundwater wells, climate stations, or collecting water quality information. So they'll be involved in the installation of the project and as well the monitoring throughout the season of gathering that information. As well, the community members will be invited to learn how we process the data, as well as just ongoing water training. So how we collect the information, how we process the information, what we do in the field, and any other questions related to kind of that Western science of water information or water science information that we collect. Through the project, we're also offering funding to each of the First Nation communities, and this covers the engagement, the training, any equipment they may require to purchase, such as life jackets and other water safety equipment, and of course to participate in the traditional knowledge sharing, which I'll talk about in a second here. And as I mentioned in, I think the first slide, what really sets this project apart from other projects is kind of this, what we would consider a two-way knowledge sharing, where, you know, as Western scientists or professionals, we go out and we want to collect numbers. So we always want to know how much water is flowing by, what the water quality is, and we associate everything with numbers. So what we're interested in doing is sharing with the First Nations our way of collecting information and how we use that information. So different field methods, standard operating procedures, and of course the desktop methods that we use to analyze that information, and then how we turn that information into decisions. And from the community members, what we're asking for from them is to help us find good sites. So all sites that we select to install any water monitoring locations or equipment are done in collaboration with First Nations. And as well, we're asking for them to share with us their traditional knowledge. So through this traditional knowledge gathering, what we've recognized and what we've heard from the First Nation communities is that, and we know this, is that when we make decisions, we tend to make it only using Western science information, so actual numbers. But what we're missing is that traditional knowledge. So as part of this project, we're interested in gathering that traditional knowledge, and as well as trying to understand how to integrate it or include it into the water decision-making process. So we recognize that there's a potential disconnect between, how we make decisions using our Western science or the regulatory framework relative to the traditional knowledge sense. So, water has a very spiritual meaning to First Nation people, and they use it for very different ways, and they connect with it in different ways than we do as in the Western science. So trying to understand what that gap is, and is there a gap? And, if, for example, a water license application came across our desk, would we make the same decision using both sets of information, or would they be different? So trying to really understand that. Western science is based on numbers. Traditional knowledge is based on traditional activities, experiences, and values. And really, so we're trying to understand this information and gather it in a way that then we can apply it going forward, testing that in different situations to make decisions. That is the long-term goal of this project. So really, kind of in a nutshell, what we're attempting to do here, and this is a very inclusive and large project. We're looking at installing a climate monitoring station, looking at installing a streamflow monitoring station where we look at both quality and quantity, understanding groundwater information, both quality and quantity, as well as bringing together that traditional knowledge so we can tie together both Western science and traditional knowledge. And I think I've talked about this already before, but the project benefits, really, this project expands and continues to build on both water quality and quantity information that we require up here in Northeast BC for both surface water and groundwater. And we're missing a lot of climate information as well. So, trying to get a sense on what's going on at that watershed scale. And this is intended to be a long-term project, recognizing that, the funding may run out in a few years, or in a couple of years actually, but we're in the process already now of looking at how we can build partnerships with either industry or government or long-term relationships and funding through First Nations so that we can ensure that this data is collected. Co-locate monitoring and collaboration with First Nations. I mentioned at the beginning that we're in conversation with all 6 First Nations that were within the study area, and at this point all 6 are interested. And so really at this point, we're looking at how we engage with the community to understand their areas of interest. So where are they interested in collecting that water information? This spring then we'll be going out and identifying those actual locations based on specific criteria we have for whether it's a hydrometric station or a groundwater well or a climate station. And then from there, once it's accessible and safe based on field conditions, we'll be in and installing and collecting information later this, early this summer, later this year. It's also about two-way knowledge sharing and building relationships. So sharing Western science with the First Nation communities, and as well, having them share their traditional knowledge with us. And of course, it's about help building sustainable resource development in the province that considers both economic, environmental, and Indigenous peoples' values and rights. A very quick overview of this project, but it's a very exciting project and one that we're really, we are excited about, and it's a new path for many of us. So hence why it's called a pilot project, and we're just embarking on this now. So any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thanks, Susan. I'm looking to see if any questions are coming in. I've got one, and it's really maybe more of an inquiry, but we've got a lot of people from industry on this webinar today. Is there any direct asks that you would have to them as to how they can assist you in this project?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dan. Absolutely. So I know that industry, or we know that industry collects a lot of information out there. For example, when you're going to apply for a use approval or a water license, often you're collecting that information, understanding both water quality and water quantity. So, if you're willing to share that information with us, that is a long-term benefit for us. And the intent of this is to collect information through this project, and potentially if industry has any available, that will be put into the public domain and used to build on the current tools that we use to support water management decisions, and continue to build them using new and additional information. And the second part to that question in regards to industry, we're always looking for additional funding. So I noted that Shell was a partner in this. So Shell has skin in the game, and it's always really valuable when industry is willing to partner, because then we can ensure that these projects can have the life that they need. You know, it's great to go out and install information or install equipment and collect information for 2 years, but it's really valuable if we can get that 10 years or even longer, that information. And that does require funding. And so if we can do it through partnerships, it's a win-win for all of us. Yeah, thanks, Dan.
Okay, great, thanks. So we'll take that into account, and perhaps that'll be in the next follow-up poll, is how can people specifically get involved? So,
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
okay, our next presenter, who's getting ready to go, is basically Han Cao and his, I guess his graduate student. Is he on here? Bay? Yeah, there he is. He's getting ready. Hey, Bay, how you doing?
I'm good. Should I start it? Hey everyone. So today my presentation is about investigating the source properties and possible causative mechanisms for the largest hydraulic fracturing induced earthquake sequence in Canada. This work is collaborated between multiple institutions. Since the year of 2010, the number of earthquakes start to increase dramatically in Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin. At Kingston et al., they suggest that this increasing seismicity is mainly caused by the hydraulic fracturing operation. As you can see from here, is the increasing trend between the hydraulic fracking wells and the seismicity highly correlated. In the meantime, in the central US, the increasing seismicity has been attributed to the wastewater disposal wells. Later, multiple studies start to investigate the possible triggering mechanism of the hydraulic fracturing-induced earthquakes. For example, Deng et al., they built a poroelastic model, as shown here, to study the triggering mechanism of the Fox Creek sequence in Alberta. They found that the stress perturbation caused by the elastic stress transfer could be the dominant triggering mechanism, as shown here, as the pulp pressure stress perturbation is too small to correlate with the earthquake occurrence. Some other studies suggest that the geological factors may play an important role on induced earthquakes. For example, Schultz et al., they found that the Leduc reef structures in Alberta are highly correlated with the distribution pattern with the seismicity. And they suggest that this Leduc reef structure may form some kind of waterways or pathways for the fluid to migrate to the vertically and to the basement, which may reactive faults locate here. To better understand injection-induced earthquakes in Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin, we installed 8 seismic stations surrounding a hydraulic fracturing height to monitor the induced earthquake. As you can see from here, these are the 8 stations we installed. During our operation, during our deployment, a magnitude 4.6 earthquake occurred on August 17, 2015, which is located in this part, around 50 kilometers to the southeast for our seismic array. As you can see to the right, the green star is the location of the magnitude 4.6 earthquake. We use a multi-station match filter method to detect some uncatalogued earthquakes, as you can see, as shown here, which is around 200 events. And there are actually 3 hydraulic fracturing wells associated with these earthquakes. which we call them well 1, well 2, and well 3. So for the objective of this study, there are 2 objectives. The first is to investigating the source parameters of this magnitude 4.6 earthquake per seconds, and second is to examine the most plausible triggering mechanism. We first use the GCAP method to calculate the moment tensor solution for this magnitude 4.6 earthquake by inverting the body and the surface waves. The upper left figure shows the synthetic and the observed seismograms, which are plotted with red and the black lines. And the bottom left figure shows the misfit for the depth range from 1 kilometers to 10 kilometers, which we found that the best focal depth is around 4 kilometers with an oblique stress fault. As you can see that our station coverage may not be perfect, so we do a confidence check by using the P-wave polarities, and you can see on the beach ball that most of the polarity actually are consistent with our GCAP method, GCAP focal mechanism solution result. Then we used a single spectrum fitting method to estimate the seismic moment and to get an initial estimate of the corner frequencies to calculate the stress drop and the rupture diameters for these earthquakes. The top 2 figures shows the spectrum fitting, single spectrum fitting for the magnitude 4.6 earthquake from P and S wave, and the bottom 2 figures shows the result for 2 smaller earthquakes. In this upper, as shown here, the black line is the spectrum of the earthquake, and the red line is a fitted spectrum with the Broom model. The stars shows the corner frequency. Next, we used a spectrum ratio method to refine the corner frequency, because the spectral ratio method can help to remove the non-source related factors such as the travel path and the set effects. Here I show you an example of the spectrum, how we calculate the spectral ratio. The bottom right figure shows the waveforms for the magnitude 4.6 main shock and smaller EGF events, which this 2 events has a high cross correlation value above 0.7. The upper left, this figure shows the spectrum of the magnitude 4.6 earthquake and the smaller earthquakes, the EGS, of course, with the noise spectrum. The bottom left figure shows the spectral ratio between these 2 events, and the red line is the fitted Broom model to the spectral ratio. The middle columns is the grid search. We perform a grid search to look for the best fitted value of the corner frequencies for these 2 events. Here I show you the results for our spectral ratio method and single spectrum fitting for the detected earthquakes. And as I showed here, the smaller dots and the squares are the results from the single spectrum fitting, while the larger dots and larger squares shows the refinement from the spectral ratio. Actually, you can see that the corner frequencies from the single spectrum actually look a bit underestimated, a little bit underestimated the corner frequencies. Well, after the spectral ratio refinement, we see that after the remove the non-source related effects, this corner frequencies are more robustly estimated. here is the comparison of our study of our cases to other injection-induced earthquakes in Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin and in the central US. The blue square is for our study. You can see that the stress drop and the corner frequencies for the induced earthquakes actually fall within the range of the similar range compared to the observed tectonic events. Suggest they have a similar seismogenic behavior to the tectonic events. Okay, after we obtain the source parameters for the earthquakes, we then in the following analysis we use our Coulomb failure criterion to study how these earthquakes most likely to be triggered. Here we calculate the Coulomb stress change by the fluid injection. Here is the equation so how the Coulomb stress change is calculated. Just two things. One thing to notice is when we have a positive Coulomb stress change, that means it will favor the failure process. If we have a negative Coulomb stress change, it will discourage the failure. Here, we set a threshold as the stress perturbation as 0.2 megapascals as a threshold to triggering based on some previous studies. We use COMSOL to build the poroelastic model. And here I show you the layer and the model setup. We built a 4-layer model, which including the upper sedimentary layer, the shale layer where the hydraulic fracturing occurred, the lower sedimentary layer, and the crystalline basement. Before the injection started, we assumed that the model is at hydrostatic equilibrium. We built 3 models to represent 3 scenarios. The first one, we only simulate the hydraulic fracturing operations as the point as the injection source, and the fault geometries are calculated based on our previous source parameter estimations. The model 2, instead of only simulate the injection, we assume that the fracture operations create a highly fractured zone, which has an older, a higher probability compared to the surrounding shale. Well, for the last model, we arbitrarily add a conduit to connect the hydraulic fracturing operations and the fault surface. Here I only show you like a circular conduit. Actually, we test multiple geometry of the conduits. The results are quite similar. Here I show you the result from our poroelastic model. For the 3 models, just a reminder, the model 1, uniform probability surrounding the hydraulic fracturing operation, which represented by the green line, and the second model with the pink line, and the third model we show it with the blue line. This is the Coulomb stress change on the fault surface, which we have after the COMSOL simulation. The left is the overall result. You can see, and the red one, the red one is the zoomed in version for this part, which you can see how the model 1 and model 2, the results for the model 1 and model 2. The orange bar is the injection history from the hydraulic fracturing operation. From this figure, we can see that both the model 1 and model 2 exhibit both a negative Coulomb stress change, actually, which will discourage the faulting of this the magnitude 4.6 earthquake. Well, in contrast, model 3, which we add a conduit to connect the fracture zone and the pre-existing fault, which has a much higher positive Coulomb stress change value, suggesting that actually model 3 may be more appropriate to explain the triggering process. Some other studies suggest that the fracture opening from hydraulic fracturing could also help to facilitate the earthquake occurrence. So here we also calculate the Coulomb stress change caused by the fracture opening to see how it will affect the fault, the stress state on the fault. Here I show you the Coulomb stress change from 3 kilometers to 5 kilometers that range, which actually has the stress perturbation from 0.003 megapascals to 0.001 megapascals, which are still much smaller than the 0.2 megapascals threshold we said before. But the fracture opening do help to accelerate the faulting process. Here are some conclusions for the study. First is that we found that stress drop values for this magnitude 4.6 earthquake sequence range from 1 to 35 megapascals, which is well within the typical range of tectonic earthquakes. And second, after we built the 3 models to simulate the triggering process, we found that the models 3, which we include a conduit-like structure, could best explain the triggering mechanism. And the last one is the fracture opening effects may also help to contribute to the occurrence of this magnitude 4.6 earthquake, although the stress perturbation is too small to reach the triggering threshold. Thank you for your attention. If you have questions, feel free to email me. And here's my email address.
Thanks, Bei. We do have 2 questions, so let's jump to them quickly before we move on. First question was, for the focal mechanism, did you assume constant velocity?
Yes, we do assume the, we based on the, you mean the GCAT method, right? We built the empirical Green's function based on the velocity structure, the 1D velocity model we have.
And the last question from Pat McClellan, for the M4.6 event focal mechanism inversion, were you able to determine the SH max orientation? And if so, how does it compare to local well borehole breakout derived values of the same?
I think we can get the SMH direction, SH max direction, but we didn't. Actually, we didn't put it here.
Okay.
I think the estimate the fractures, the horizontal wells actually perpendicular to the SH max and the fracture openings, so that the fracture opening will add in the direction of the SH mean.
Okay. Steve Rogers had a question here, both on chat, but basically saying that you mentioned hydrostatic conditions assumed, but Montney is typically overpressured. So would that be an issue?
Yes. We assume the hydrostatic equilibrium because we want to here we want only calculate the stress perturbations from the fracture, the fluid injections. Actually, that's a good question that the Montney is overpressured, which we think the overpressure, the formation, which may have a higher porosity and permeability, which may actually make our results, underestimate the pore pressure change. stress perturbation. But here we, as I just mentioned, we just assume a hydrostatic equilibrium to calculate the stress perturbation.
Yeah, to keep it constant. Okay, thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Thanks, Han. I know you're probably listening somewhere. Did he pass the test? Our last speaker today is,
thank you.
I don't know if he's on, getting ready.
Yes, I'm on.
There he is. He's there. He's arrived. Alive.
Yes.
How do you like waiting to be the last one?
It's fine. I enjoyed all the talks.
Okay, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay, can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone. Today I'm going to present the results of a statistical analysis on the factors influencing induced seismicity susceptibility Montney play area in northeastern BC. I also like to thank Geoscience BC and CSUR for this opportunity. Okay, so this study is part of a larger project funded by Geoscience BC. And this project, we are developing a framework map for susceptibility to induced seismicity using integrated machine learning and mechanistic validation approach. So to give you an idea, so we'll be using the machine learning part to produce the maps. However, machine learning produces the trends and associations between data and now the causative relations between the different parameters. For that, in parallel, we are performing a series of laboratory experiments and numerical simulations to provide mechanistic validation for the machine learning results that we get. So before I continue, I'd like to give two definitions. First, machine learning. It is a branch of artificial intelligence that focuses on building applications that learn from data and improve their accuracy over time by acquiring new data and improving the quality of the results. And second is algorithm. The algorithm is a sequence of statistical processing steps. In machine learning, algorithms are trained, in quotation marks, to find patterns and features in massive amounts of data in order to make decisions and predictions. So in this study, we use machine learning to identify which wells were associated with induced seismicity and which wells were not. The motivation behind this study comes from the panel's report in 2019, in which they identified three key knowledge gaps in terms of induced seismicity. The first one was fault slip activation mechanisms such as pore pressure increase, stress transfer, and aseismic slip. The second one is the controlling parameters such as operational and geological factors. And lastly, knowing what we know can be forecast susceptibility to induced seismicity. There are examples of applications of machine learning on forecasting susceptibility to induced seismicity, such as the work done by Pauli et al. For the Duvernay play in 2018, and recently Paulina and David Eaton's work for Montney. Both these works use the logistic regression algorithms that is applied on different geological features, and the output is a map, as you can see here, that shows the probability of seismic activation potential from 0 to 1. So in our study, this table shows the 14 different geological and operational features that we used. Here, I'd like to point out the sources of uncertainty in our analysis. The first one is data quantity. For example, in distance to basement, we had access to data from 28 vertical wells. The second one is data quality, of course. And lastly, where is the data interpolation at wells that these parameters were not available. And for that, we only use a simple averaging method of the closest 3 parameters at each well. In this study, we used 3 different algorithms. The first one is decision tree classifier, followed by random forest classifier and gradient boost. The reason that we chose these methods is because they are powerful classifiers. They are easy to implement and also interpret, and they are less sensitive to data processing, which I'm not going to get into in this talk. So the way it works that we compile a database and then we split it into 2 training and test data sets. The training data sets are used to train the algorithm and basically tune the algorithms for the parameters that we are using. And then at last, the part that is not used for training the algorithm, the test data, is used to validate the performance of these algorithms. So here is the results of this training the algorithm. So one of the outputs is feature importance. Basically, features are the input data. And here we see that we see the importance of different features. I should mention that the green bars are geological features and the blue bars are the operational ones. What we can see here, and also on the bottom are the features, and on the left side is the coefficients. These coefficients doesn't have a physical meaning. The important thing is the relative value difference between these. So should keep that in mind. And so what we see that in almost in all of these algorithms, the pore pressure gradient pumped up as a very important parameter. Overall, we saw that geological features showed a higher importance than operational ones in all 3 models. Also in operational features, one of the interesting results that we saw is the importance of completion length. And here completion length is the total wells completion length. And that showed as the highest important feature among all the other operational factors. And surprisingly, we see that maximum injection pressure and injection rate in all 3 models showed as the lowest important features. And another interesting result that we saw here was the gradient boost algorithm sensitivity to the azimuth differences between well direction and local maximum horizontal stress, and also local and regional maximum horizontal stresses. So basically this shows that each algorithm is sensitive to a different type of data. So we use the confusion matrix to evaluate the performance of these algorithms. And in terms of the accuracy of these algorithms, we saw that they perform very similarly between from 97 to 98% accuracy. So this was the case here. And in terms of the precision, in terms of the correct predictions of induced seismicity wells, the random forest had performed slightly better compared to other 2 algorithms. And the next step was to interpret the results of these algorithms. So for this, we use what is called the SHAP analysis. The Shapley method is based on the gaming theory approach. So in this graph, what we see is the order of the input parameters and features On the right side, we see the feature values. So the red ones are features with higher values, and the blue ones are features with lower values. And on the bottom is the Sharpe value, or basically the impact on model output. So a positive value shows a positive correlation with induced seismicity, and a negative value shows a negative correlation with induced seismicity. So here are some interesting results. First, for example, in terms of completion length, we see that the higher values for completion length have higher correlations with induced seismicity, which kind of makes sense. Like the longer the well, there is a higher probability of intersecting a well or basically stimulating a larger volume. And also there are other parameters such as injection depth and pore pressure gradient show that, again, high values correlate with induced seismicity. Another thing that we can observe here is distance to faults, which again shows that these models is performing good, because the lower values basically means that the closer we are to a fault. And as the lower values have positive correlations, means that the closer that you are to a fault, there's a higher probability of induced seismicity. But coming back to my second slide about the importance of mechanistic validation, we see examples such as volume, that the model basically interpreted that high injection volumes basically correlate with less induced seismicity, less probability of triggering induced seismicity. So these are the things that we should take into consideration when working with machine learning. And it shows the importance of other methods such as laboratory experiments or numerical simulations. So in conclusion, this study demonstrated the application of machine learning to uncover the associations of large data sets in terms of association with induced seismicity. Overall, our results show that geological factors are generally had a higher importance than operational factors in terms of wells being associated with induced seismicity. In all models, pore pressure gradient was rated as a very high important parameter, and other parameters such as distance to basement, distance to known faults, and maximum horizontal stress orientation also marked as important features. In terms of operational factors, we saw that completion length and well direction relative to maximum horizontal stress are also of high importance in terms of triggering induced seismicity. So thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer your questions or any follow-up questions that you have and comments.
Thank you, Afshin. We do have a question, and then we're going to kind of wrap up early. We're almost at noon here. Question from one of the participants is, was the injected volume normalized by well length? Otherwise, it would just follow the fact that you said longer wells are more related to IS.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So for this study, I used the stages, basically data. The only parameter that I used was in terms of the well was the completion length, because generally like stages lengths are similar. So that way the completion length wouldn't be important. But in terms of other parameters, I use the stages. So the volumes are state at each stage.
Each stage, okay. Well, once again, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
You took through. Al, I'm going to turn it over to you for any wrap up.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, thank you everyone for your presentations, and thank you to Geoscience BC for this very, very valuable collaboration that we have together. Thank you also to our corporate sponsor, CalFrac Well Services, and thank you to all of you for joining in, for taking the time to tune in today. A reminder that our next webinar is on March 9th. Daniel Shaw will talk about the sequence stratigraphic analysis of the Duvernay Formation and Kaybob area shale. This will happen on March 9th. So please visit our website to register and to get additional information. Richard, Carlos, any last words?
Just thank you very much to all the presenters and to CSUR for putting this on. And once again, thanks everyone for listening to our work. And hopefully, if you have any ideas, please do reach out to us, because we'd love to hear how we can help your work become more profitable and help British Columbians with their standard of living. Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys. Okay, so until next time, please enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe, and goodbye. Bye-bye.